Okay. So what I'm going to do in this particular presentation is that I'm going to show you a lot of movies. And this is the first movie which I want you guys to look at. I hope is the movie streaming properly?
Yes.
Okay, so this movie was taken from the YouTube. So you have a person here wearing a red shirt. I don't want to describe everything that goes on. So he has a drill and a scale, okay? And the scale is attached to the end of the drill. And now the drill is on. Okay, let me play the movie once again because let me go back and show you the movie once again. So this movie is called as an inverted pendulum, and basically you have a scale at, attached to a drill. Okay, the base of the scale is attached to a drill. Now, if you leave the scale as such, that's like a simple pendulum. You see that it is like a simple pendulum, and you see that it actually vibrates about an equilibrium position. Now the drill is actually switched on. When the drill is switched on, you see that the pendulum gets stabilized in an inverted point. So this is basically an unstable equilibrium. The way the pendulum is being stabilized now, the way the pendulum, the scale is being oriented now, is in such a fashion that it's actually an unstable point, right? So I hope you have understood what is the experiment. So if the drill is not on, it's actually a simple pendulum, which oscillates about the equilibrium. But when the drill is switched on, the base of the pendulum is oscillating so fast. The base of the pendulum is oscillating so fast such that the pendulum gets actually stabilized in an unstable equilibrium. Okay, this is an experiment which all of you can do at home. And in fact, there is a much more simpler version of the experiment. The much more simpler version of the experiment that I would talk about is you try to balance a pencil or a pen on your fingertip. Suppose you want to balance a pencil or a pen on your fingertip. What would you do if you keep the pen just like that on your fingertip? It's not going to stay there. It's going to fall down. But if you move your finger around, that is when it is going to remain stabilized in a vertical position. So you can keep it vertical if the base of the pendulum is oscillating very, very fast. You can keep the pen balanced on your fingertip if you move your finger very, very fast. Okay, so there is a balancing of some kind of forces, and this particular pendulum is actually called. This is called the Kapitsa effect, and it's there in your usual physics textbooks. And I hope you have understood the effect. So this is the movie, which was my first slide. Have you guys seen the movie? Any questions? Have you understood? Hello? Okay. So the work that I'm going to present, or the work that I'm going to show you, is a question which we are trying to answer in our lab. And we are actually doing computational chemistry based on these physical models that we have. And the question that we ask is the following. Can we do this particular experiment? Can we put things in an unstable point? So can we do the same thing with atoms, molecules, and electrons? So this is one of the themes that we are actually following in our lab. So let's take the case of ammonia. Okay, ammonia is also what do you have for the umbrella motion of ammonia? You have a case in which the ammonia. So on the left-hand side, you actually see ammonia like this, and on the right-hand side, you actually see ammonia in an inverted form. The blue surface that you see here is the potential energy surface for the umbrella motion of ammonia. Okay, this potential energy surface is actually constructed out of two coordinates. One coordinate involves the NH stretching, and the other involves the basically you think about the solid angle with which it flips. Okay, so you have a double well potential in the case of ammonia molecule. So if you think about the nuclear dynamics, or if you think about how ammonia moves, you have the probability of finding ammonia in its umbrella shaped form or its inverted form. The probabilities could be equal, could be equal because those are really degenerate states. There is a slight splitting between them, which is called as tunnel splitting. So if you have such a case, now can you actually make ammonia stabilized on top of the barrier of the double well? So this is what we are actually looking for. So the role of the drill, which was shown to you in the movie, is done by a strong laser. Okay, so the laser is something which is an oscillating electric field. The oscillating electric field actually shakes things up, and it shakes things up in a periodic fashion. So there is a periodic force exerted on the system, and using this periodic force, can you actually put ammonia on top of the barrier? And what is the barrier in the case of the ammonia umbrella inversion? The barrier in the case of ammonia umbrella inversion is actually the planar transition state. And you know why it is, because pyramidal ammonia is stable. Pyramidal ammonia is stable because of simple lone pair bond pair repulsion. Okay, a simple lone pair bond pair repulsion is a very simple way of saying that ammonia is pyramidal. Now, obviously, if it starts becoming planar, what is going to happen is the lone pair bond pair distance is going to keep decreasing. When it keeps decreasing, the energy is going to increase. When it becomes planar, you will have a barrier, and then again, when it moves to the other side, it keeps going down because the lone pair bond pair distance keeps increasing. So when I have a laser, can I? So the question that I ask is, according to the movie which you saw before, when I have a laser, which is an oscillating force, can I actually put ammonia on top of the barrier? So as long as my drill is on, my scale or my simple pendulum is in a vertical inverted position. The same fashion, as long as my laser is on, can I keep ammonia on top of the barrier? And thereby, can we have some sort of a model for transition state spectroscopy? So this is one of the themes that we are following in our lab. And we do a lot of computational chemistry. We do a lot of computational chemistry in order to understand this particular phenomenon, whether it is feasible, in what would be the experimental parameters involved, what would be the strength of the laser that you want to take, so on and so forth. So there are various questions. So this is, so therefore, the title of my talk for today is going to be the computational chemistry of atoms and molecules in time varying fields. Okay, so it's not just an atom or a molecule that we are going to be looking at. So the orbitals of ammonia are not going to look like the usual orbitals of ammonia. The orbitals of water molecule are not going to look like the usual orbitals of water molecule. You are not going to see the usual kinds of lone pair, because now there is a laser on top of it. And the laser is what? The laser is actually, you have an electric field at every instant of time, which it's a homogeneous electric field at every instant of time, which changes its direction continuously. So you can think about it like this. If you have water molecule, you have a continuous electron density around it, right? The electrons form an electron density, and you have a continuous electron density around it. If at a particular instant, if you have an electric field pointing in a particular direction, what is that electric field going to do? That electric field is actually going to induce a certain dipole moment inside water molecule. So water molecule with a finite electric field is going to have a distorted density. But the point of it is, it's a laser which is time dependent. When the laser is time dependent, the directionality of the electric field periodically oscillates. When that happens, there is a sloshing which is introduced into the electron density of, say, water molecule or ammonia molecule. What is the effect? What is the effect that such a kind of laser have? What is the kind of effect that such a laser has on the electronic structure or the molecular orbitals or the densities? And then what kind of effect does it have on the geometries, on the dynamics, so on and so forth? So these are the things that we'll actually try to look at in today's talk. There will be a lot of movies, and I hope that those movies stream properly. So most of these movies are a result of calculations using computational chemistry packages which were modified in our lab. So, so I'll show you. We'll show you a lot of examples in movies. Now, to put things into a formal situation, let us start with. So, we are not going to be looking at the time-independent Schrodinger equation now. If you want to look at quantum objects like atoms, molecules, and electrons, you would look at now. Now you would look at the time-dependent analog of the Schrodinger equation. Okay. So the first equation which is given here, is the time-dependent Schrodinger equation for a particle in an oscillating field. Okay. So what do you have here? On the left-hand side, the first term, by the way, this equation is given in atomic units. The first equation here is given in atomic units. You have I dou by dou t of psi of r comma t. So that defines my initial problem. Given a particular initial condition, you are going to have a solution for this particular equation. Okay. And the time dependence of the laser field comes in terms of an interaction with the momentum operator. Okay. So the momentum operator is put in brackets on the right-hand side. It is not the usual momentum operator. The momentum operator is shifted by a time-varying field, which represents the laser field. The A of t term here represents the laser field, so on and so forth. Now, we do one thing. This is the usual Schrodinger equation for a time-dependent potential for a single particle in an oscillating field. Now, we actually play a game here, which you will understand and in the later stages of the game, and we will also talk about the movie which we showed you in the beginning. Okay. So we do something which is called as a unitary transformation. This unitary transformation basically tries to remove some of the time-dependent terms, and we convert it into such a kind of framework. Okay. Here in the first equation, I had V of r, which is completely time independent, and the momentum interaction, the interaction with the laser of the particle was through the momentum term, the time-dependent momentum terms, but using a unitary transformation. A unitary transformation is nothing but the expression is given here. There's a little bit of mathematics which is done. That maths actually converts into the potential becoming time-dependent. So V here you had in the first equation you had V of r. Now in the equation which is given in this blue region, you have V of r plus alpha of t. Okay. So this alpha of t is the amplitude with which the laser oscillates. So now I have a time-dependent potential, and I can look at my molecular orbitals or my wave functions within the time-dependent framework. And this transformation is called as the Kramer-Henneberger transformation, but that is just a name. All that you have to understand is the following, that the effect of the laser is incorporated into my V of r, which is the potential energy part of the atom or a molecule, which defines your problem. And I have a potential which oscillates in time. So simply the picture that you have to take forth is the following. You have water molecule, on top of that I have a laser field. You have ammonia molecule, on top of that I have a time-dependent laser field. Okay. So given that, now let us look at what happens for a multi-electron atom. Now I have my wave function here, the same many particle wave function now. I have the kinetic energy of the electrons here. The kinetic energy of electrons are given by TE. And then I have the nuclear electron attraction term, which is shifted by a time-dependent factor. Okay, the nuclear electron attraction term is shifted by a time-dependent factor, and I have the electron-electron repulsion term. In principle, the electron-electron repulsion term goes as 1 by Rij. Now, Ri is shifted by a certain time-dependent factor. Rj is also shifted by a certain time-dependent factor. If I have 1 by mod of Ri minus Rj, then the time dependence is going to cancel out. So the electron-electron repulsion factor just remains the same. So this is my Schrodinger equation for a multi-electron atom. In this case, I have talked about an atom. For a multi-electron atom, let us say helium atom, let us say argon, or anything of that sort. This is the time-dependent Schrodinger equation for it. And alpha zero, the term alpha zero here, is the maximum field. So that's basically the amplitude, the maximum field amplitude of the laser. Okay, the maximum field amplitude of a laser, which is a laser parameter, which is given by epsilon 0 by omega squared. Epsilon 0 is actually the electric field strength here. Epsilon 0 is the electric field strength. Omega is the frequency of the laser. So what I'm trying to do in these plots is the first plot on your left-hand side. I'm trying to give you a picture of how this particular potential looks like. And before that, I have done a trick on the equation on top of the figure in the left-hand side. So Vne of Ri plus alpha of t. I have a Fourier series expansion here. So this is a Fourier series expansion, the usual Fourier series which you have learned. So I have sum over n equal to minus infinity to plus infinity multiplied by Vn of Ri times e to the power of minus in omega t. So this is a Fourier expansion that I have. Okay. Now let us look at the different Fourier components. How are the Fourier components defined? The Fourier components are defined by this equation which is given below. Vn of Ri equal to 1 by 2 pi. So 0 to 2 pi, all of that. It's a simple integration. Now, what it does is the following. So the black line here in this picture, is the potential that an electron sees without the laser. The black line is a potential which the electron sees without the laser. The red line here is an effective potential that the electron sees in the presence of the laser. So what do you see here? The single-centered Coulombic potential, which is represented by the black line on the figure on the left-hand side, now gets converted into a different kind of potential. So the zeroth order potential, or the major potential which the system sees, is given by this particular red line. Okay. So what is the difference between the black curve and the red line? The black curve for an atom is a single-centered well. Okay, if there is a single-centered well, you assume that the electron which is bound is actually going to remain in that particular well. But what is the shape conversion that has happened? The shape conversion that has happened is the single-centered Coulomb potential has now become a two-centered Coulomb potential. Okay, the single-centered Coulomb potential in the presence of the laser gets converted into a double well potential. Okay. So in principle, the red line actually looks like a diatomic molecule. So the take-home message from this particular plot is the following: that if I have an atom in the presence of a laser, the major interactions or the major potential that it is going to see in a time-averaged picture is going to be a double well kind of system. And this double well, so the separation between the wells is 2 alpha 0. Alpha 0 is electric field strength by omega squared. So the separation between the wells actually depends purely on the laser parameters. Okay. So the black line is reminiscent of an atom. The red line is also reminiscent to you of a diatomic molecule. A diatomic molecule actually looks like this, right? It's going to have two centers. So there will be a charge center at -2 and another charge center at +2. So you can think of this to be some kind of a it is a monoatomic system, but in the presence of the laser, it could look like a diatomic molecule. Now, if you keep increasing the laser intensity and frequency, you see that the separation between the wells keeps increasing. So if I take an atom and I shine a laser on it, and let us say it is not ionizing, nothing of that sort is happening. When you have such a kind of condition, what is going to happen is that the atom is going to start looking like a diatomic molecule. The electronic structure of the atom is going to start looking like a diatomic molecule. So this is what we see from this particular picture that we have. So this is the term which is the zeroth order term. So the zeroth order term, if you look at the zeroth order term, n is equal to 0. If you substitute in this particular equation, in the equation given above, you see that that part of the potential is actually time independent. Okay, that part of the potential when n is equal to 0, which is plotted here, is actually completely time independent. So this is the zeroth order time average, which is actually time independent. Okay. And the rest of the terms which are time dependent, so V1, V2, V3, V4, etc. So these terms are actually responsible for ionization or time dependent motion in the system. But the idea of it is like this. See, if you have terms which are positive and negative, which oscillate in time, the faster motions are actually averaged out. So if you have a frequency of the laser which is high enough, these particular terms will actually average out to 0 because they become positive and negative because of the directionality involved in the case of the electric field, right? So these are the terms which are not very important, the terms on the left-hand side. The term on the right-hand side is the zeroth order effective potential, which is completely time independent. And this supports bound states. And the chemistry is usually given in terms of the bound states. But if you want to put it in usual chemistry terms, a single-centered Coulomb potential is going to look like a diatomic molecule. So in the presence of a laser, an atom looks like a diatomic molecule. So this is the first message that we have. Now, just to give you a physical picture about the reference frame in which we are working. So we did in one of the previous slides, we did a unitary transformation here. So this time-dependent quantum mechanical unitary transformation, it's simply a change of a frame of reference. So the first case is the lab frame that you're looking at. So you have a potential which is stationary, and you have an electron which is moving in the polarization direction of the laser. So let us say that you have a linearly polarized laser, which is moving in the x direction. So the electron is bound to execute some sort of a quiver motion like this, right? Which is shown on the left-hand side animation. If you look at the right-hand side animation, you see that the potential is moving, okay? You see that the potential is moving, and then you can look at stationary states of the electrons. But what you have to understand is the following, that both of these pictures, they're just two different pictures of the same thing, okay? Both of these pictures are equivalent, and they're just two different pictures of the same thing. For doing computational chemistry of atoms and molecules in the presence of a laser, we use the picture or the movie on the right-hand side. Is this fine? Are there any questions till now? Any questions? Or
if they have a question, they will probably put in a chat box. Maybe we can discuss
okay.
then.
But are the movies are streaming properly, or?
Can't
Okay,
see
it should
any.
be fine. Okay. So now what we will do is we will take a model. We'll take a model and we'll try to solve time-dependent Schrodinger equation to actually give you a physical picture of why an atom looks like a diatomic molecule. So this is what I had shown to you. So we have a well here. Okay, I have a well here. On top of it, on top of that, I have a laser. So because of the laser is shown in red here. The laser keeps increasing in amplitude. And as it keeps increasing in amplitude, the blue curve here starts shaking faster and faster. So no, it's not faster and faster. The amplitude, the extent with which it shakes actually moves faster and faster. On the picture below, the black line here is a bound state. I start with a bound state. So it could be representative of an electron, atom, or a molecule. And you'll see something interesting which is going to happen to this time-dependent probability density. So you see that the probability density is the black line here. The blue line here is the potential. The first one is the laser that you are looking at. Now, as the laser keeps coming to full strength, you will see something very interesting which happens to the probability density of the single particle or the single electron. You see that initially in the beginning you had a single lobe. Let me play it back one more time, or let me actually use the mouse to play. So the laser keeps increasing in strength. The potential oscillates with larger and larger amplitudes. What you see for the probability density is that the probability density amplitude becomes smaller and smaller. And after a particular point, you will see something very interesting happening to it. And what is interesting is the following. You see that the single lobed probability density, which you had in the beginning, actually gets split into two lobes, and those lobes remain stable as such. Okay, those lobes remain stable as such, and this is the kind of stabilization on an unstable point that we are talking about. So, let me play that movie once again. I had a single lobed probability density. As the laser kept increasing in strength, the probability density actually splits into two. Now, what looks like the single lobed probability density is representative of an atom. So when the electric field strength is very less, it looks like a usual atom with a single centered Coulomb potential. But when the laser increases to maximum intensity, the atom actually gets split into two, and this double lobed probability density looks like a diatomic molecule. If you have the electronic concentration, if it is maximum at two particular points, that actually looks like a diatomic molecule. So again, this was a model to understand why an atom looks like a diatomic molecule, and this is done in using time-dependent potentials. So this is one of the first model calculations which you're looking at. On the right-hand side, the plot which I have given to you is the following. The blue one is the potential. The potential supports a bound state. Now, the black line here is the effective potential, which I talked to you about in the previous slide. And the red one is the stabilized laser dressed state, which actually is dichotomous, or which looks like a diatomic molecule. So this is the basic idea behind the work that we are actually doing. And so if the laser dust atom looks like this is actually not just theory. There have been experiments in which people have observed such kind of states. And all these experiments are very, very recent experiments. In 2013, people had looked at the stabilization of helium atoms in the presence of a laser. And Eichmann and these people who had performed those experiments actually called this as an exotic type of stable atom in the presence of strong electromagnetic fields. And very recently in Nature Physics in April 2018, they had looked at absorption spectra of argon atom, which was addressed by a strong IR pulse. So you have an IR laser, and they could see a signature of these states. So these states are being observed in experiments. The experiments are a little bit complicated, but that's simply because the laser intensities are very, very high. So the laser intensities are typically of the order of 10 to the power of 14 watt per centimeter squared. Now, 10 to the power of 14 watt per centimeter squared as a measure of electric field strength is, if not comparable, but even more than the internal electric fields of atoms and molecules. So if you do a quick Bohr theory or a quick calculation using Bohr theory or the Bohr atom model, you would be able to calculate what is the internal electric field inside hydrogen atom. Now, the number that you get out of it would be typically the number that you would get out of it is 10 to the power of 11 volt per meter. And nowadays you can have lasers which are comparable to those sort of electric fields. So the electric field strength of the laser is actually comparable to the internal electric field of an atom or a molecule. Now, when that is the case, your usual time-dependent perturbation theory, which you learn in textbooks or that you learn in your courses, is not actually applicable. And you have to work within frameworks in which the strength of the laser is actually incorporated inside your Hamiltonian. So this is what it is. So what did we say till now? We said that an atom starts looking like a diatomic molecule. So let us now do some real calculations. So the black line here again is the atom without the laser. So here I have given you densities, momentum densities, and orbitals in the case of helium atom. So the first, on the top of the line, when alpha 0 is equal to 0, that's the case when you have a free field helium atom. So the rho of R which is portrayed here, which comes in those dark blue shapes, rho of R is the dark blue density. You notice that when the laser is off, obviously the atom is spherical if the laser is off. But then when the laser is switched on, when alpha 0 becomes 1.76, you see that the spherical density now starts looking ellipsoidal. So the direction of the polarization of the laser is along the region in which the spherical density gets extended. So you have the spherical density which gets converted into something which is ellipsoidal. You keep increasing the strength of the laser. What happens is the charge density starts spreading out still ellipsoidally. And then finally, here rho of R, you look at this particular value 4.61, alpha 0 equal to 4.61. You see that the single lobed ellipsoid has actually split into two lobes. Okay, and 4.61. If you look at the dark blue charge density for 4.61, that charge density looks like the charge density of a diatomic molecule. And on the left-hand side, I have actually plotted the ground and the first excited states. And these are basically natural orbitals, natural spin orbitals have been plotted. So the one without the nodal structure is actually the ground state one, so on and so forth. So again, the idea that is exemplified here is the following: that if I have the usual spherical density of an atom in the presence of a laser gets converted into something that looks like a diatomic molecule. So the properties that you expect out of a laser dressed atom are the chemical properties of a diatomic molecule. Okay. Now, if you have such a condition, you're bound to get new chemistry or different kind of chemistry, and this is what we will see on the next set of problems that we are going to look at. So before going to any before going to complicated or / simple molecules, we'll look at a particular model. And basically, this model, the calculations which I'm going to present to you have been done using a software package which is freely available for all of us for doing electronic structure calculations. This package is called as GAMESS, GAMESS. I forget what is the full form of GAMESS, but GAMESS is a open source ab initio package which is available for you to do calculations. And the calculations that I'm going to present to you are done using this particular software. And the model or the question that we actually looked at was the case of 2 electrons in a 3D Gaussian double well. So the red line here is a double well. And then I have one electron which is upspin in one well and another electron which is downspin in the other well. So the question that we ask is the following: what happens to both of these electrons? So it's a 2-electron system that we're looking at. What happens to both of these electrons when I drive it with a laser of the form which is shown above? Okay. So the way you interpret the picture is the way you want to interpret the picture is the following. And this is the electric field strength, how it varies as a function of time. So this comes on top of this, the physical problem that you're looking at. And where is this particular model used? This model has been used to model 2-electron double well quantum dots. Okay. So many people like Anika and Satterbaum, etc., they have looked at ICD effects in quantum dots, so on and so forth. So this particular model is very well used in the literature. We simply thought that let us look at what happens to both of the electrons, one electron in one well and the other electron in the other well. And what did I tell you before? What I told you before is the following: that an atom starts looking like a diatomic molecule. This was the statement which I made. So in the case of an atom, without the laser, you have a single-centered Coulombic potential. In the presence of the laser, that becomes double well. Now here, in this particular case, if you look at the double well, Gaussian double well, you have one electron in one well. So one well, in the presence of the laser, is going to become a double well. The other well on the right, in the presence of the laser, is also going to become a double well, right? So this is what is pictorially represented here on the right-hand side, this picture which I'm trying to show you. So you have the picture on the rightmost part. On the rightmost part, I have 2 wells, okay? One is on the right and the other. Without the laser, each of them are individually single wells. But when you have the laser, each of them are going to split into 2. So in the case of the double well, each of the wells of the double well are going to split into 2, and the splitting is going to be proportional to the laser parameters that you choose. In fact, it is going to be proportional to the intensity of the laser that you choose. So one well gets split into 2, the other well gets split into 2, and both of them add up. Okay, in the case of the double well potential, both of them add up. Now, both of them, if they add up, then you can actually see that the well on the left becomes a double well, the well on the right becomes a double well. So these two can add up in a fashion such that the deepest minimum happens right in the middle. Okay, the deepest minimum happens right in the middle. So this is what we have shown here. For different laser parameters, the constituent well on the left gets split into 2, the constituent well on the right gets split into 2. Both of them add up on top of each other and they give you a deep well in the middle. Now, what is the implication? If you have a deep well in the middle, the deep well is now appearing on top of the barrier, right? So the blue curve given here is without the laser. Now, when you have the laser, each of these wells gets split into two. They add up together, and when they add up together for a particular set of laser parameters, alpha 0 equal to 4.8 scaled atomic units. The green curve here is a well which is deepest at the point of the barrier. So this implies the following. When you had one electron in one well and the other electron in the other well when the laser was not switched on, when you switch on the laser, you can have a particular case of the laser in which a single well appears right on top of the barrier, which means that both the electrons are going to reside on top of the barrier as long as the laser is switched on. Now you think about the movie which I showed you in the beginning. You remember what happened in the movie, right? You had a scale which was connected to a drill. When the drill was switched on, you could put the scale in an inverted position. So the inverted position of the scale is a barrier. So as long as the drill was on, the scale was remaining like that at an unstable equilibrium. In the same way, suppose I have one electron in one well and another electron in the other well. If I have a laser, there is a possibility for a certain laser set of parameters, like alpha 0 equal to 4.8 here. You have a single well in the middle at the position of the barrier. So both the electrons could actually be balanced on top of the barrier and would remain there as long as the laser is switched on. So this is what one could surmise. And we tried to check this. And how did we do it? We did calculations using this GAMES software. We used a Gaussian basis set. And this is very, very easy to do because all that you have to do is, for GAMES, the source code is available. And if you look through the source code, you will find a particular point at which the single electron integrals are calculated. So in order to calculate the interaction between the double well Gaussian quantum dot and the electrons are described in a Gaussian basis set. The potential is also a Gaussian double well. So simply the integrals will turn out to be overlap integrals. So it is very easy to set up the calculations. So all that we did was we took the nuclear electron attraction integrals which GAMES calculates. We replaced them by the integrals which we are interested in. So the source code was available to us, and then we were able to do electronic structure calculations using GAMES. And since you have a 2-electron system in this case, we actually did full CI calculations. And what did we do? As a function of the laser parameter, alpha 0, which is given in the plot below here, as a function of the set of laser parameters, we varied the set of laser parameters and we looked at the energies. And we saw that when the single well became, when the double well became a single well on top of the barrier, there was a minimum in the energy. So E0 here, the curve E0 here, the blue curve E0 here is the energy, the CI energy as a function of the laser parameters. And you could see that as you keep increasing the laser parameters, it goes through a hump and then finally reaches this particular minimum. This minimum and stable point is the point when both the electrons get stabilized on top of the barrier. So once we did these energy calculations, we also looked at the orbitals. So initially, the first plot here, when alpha equal to 0, the blue lobe without the nodal plane denotes a ground state density. This is the basically it's a density of a set of natural spin. It's not a density; it is a molecular orbital. So the blue one, the nodeless one, denotes a ground state. Now, as you keep increasing the laser, what is going to happen is the overlap between these two are going to increase. So at alpha equal to 4.7, so the potential was this. The potential is given on the rightmost side. As the laser keeps coming on, what happens is the well becomes deepest in the middle, and now you have a single lobe density for alpha equal to 4.7. Now, the single lobe density when alpha equal to 4.7 is the point at which both the electrons are paired up on top of the barrier. Okay, so as long as the laser is on to its full strength, both the electrons get paired up on top of the barrier, and you have a single lobe density. If you keep increasing it further, it simply stretches away. So for this particular laser parameter, you can actually keep both the electrons. Usually bound states reside in wells. But in this case, when I shine the laser together with it, both the electrons get paired up on top of the well. And by the way, the laser that I am using is not something which is it's not something which is resonant with the energy levels. This is a completely off resonant diode. So it mixes all possible states to give you this particular configuration in which both the electrons get paired up on top of the barrier. And so these were the results from a time-independent calculation done using the GAMES software. And after that, what we did was we said that we wanted to really check this in the lab frame. So what we did was we take the CI Hamiltonian and we solve time-dependent Schrodinger equation for it. So now we are looking at quantum dynamics. So the black plot here, the black line here, is the laser pulse which was used. And the maximum field strength or the maximum amplitude of the laser was set to 4.7, the value at which we had actually got this. And then, so the laser slowly rises from 0 to a maximum strength of alpha 0 equal to 4.7. The red line here looks at how the energy goes as a function of the laser parameters. So the energy keeps increasing, obviously, and then you see that it does something very, very nice when the peak of the laser pulse is reached. When the region looks like a CW region, or when the intensity is fixed at 4.7 AU, which is the laser parameter which we are looking for, the energy simply starts oscillating about a particular mean. And the mean here is actually the Kramer, the energy that we had actually got out from the time-independent CI calculations. So this is the first set of quantum dynamics which I am showing you. And so during this pulse, as long as the pulse is on till about 500 scale time units, you see that the energy keeps oscillating about a mean. So this is that at a particular region in which the electrons actually remain on top of the barrier. It remains on top of the barrier. And then we see something very, very interesting when we switch off the laser. So when you switch off the laser, there is no longer anything that keeps both the electron on top of the barrier. Okay, the laser is not there anymore. So then the energy suddenly rises and the energy stabilizes near the ionization energy of the system, which means that one of the electrons has actually got ejected out from here when the laser pulse was switched off. So as the laser pulse was rising, both of the electrons were driven from their individual wells to the top of the barrier. They remained on top of the barrier as long as the laser intensity was fixed at 4.7 AU. Then when you switched off the laser pulse, what happened was one electron actually got ejected out. Now, this is very obvious, and it's a very, very simple reason on why. There is a very simple reason or common sense as to why this should happen. So initially, the first picture that you have here is when the laser is zero field. Zero field is when the laser is not there. So you have one electron in one well and the other electron is in the other well. Obviously, there is going to be less of electronic repulsion when both of them are in their individual wells. The electronic repulsion is going to be less. But now the laser is switched on and both the electrons get driven to a top of the barrier. They pair up on top of the barrier. Obviously, what is going to happen is that the electronic repulsion is going to increase. Now, when you suddenly switch off the pulse, they are in a state in which there is a maximum electronic repulsion. So there is nothing which is keeping them together when you switch off the pulse suddenly. And obviously, because of the increased electronic repulsion, one electron is going to get kicked off. But as long as the laser is on, this process does not happen. As long as the laser is on, the ionization doesn't take place. The energy rise is very, very slow as long as the laser is kept stable at those particular laser parameters. But when you switch it off because of the increased electronic repulsion, and one electron gets kicked off. So what is the message of the story? The message of the story is the following, that you can actually put electrons at unstable points on potential energy surfaces or potential energy curves, and you can get interesting chemistry out of it. Not only that, this is a kind of spatial control which you have achieved. So two electrons which are localized in two different regions separated by a double well potential were brought together on top of the barrier, which is an unstable equilibrium. So spatially, you have actually modified things, or you have mixed up things. You have caused a hybridization to bring electrons to the top of the barrier. When you switched off the laser, the electron actually escapes. So you have some sort of a temporal control, or you have a control of how phenomena take place in time. And you also have a spatial control when you actually use a laser. So in principle, the laser could be used as some sort of a catalyst. By the way, the intensities used here are these are going to be very difficult experiments if you want to perform them, because the intensities are very, very high. So this is one of the model problems which we solved as we were developing our programs. So all of these calculations are done using usual open source packages or computational chemistry packages which are available to you. If you want to do such calculations, all that you have to do is once you have understood how to do these calculations, open up the source code. You can simply modify things and you can do whatever you want. So this was done using Gamus. Now, the idea is the following. If you have, you can have two electrons on top of a barrier using a laser. We wanted to look at ammonia in the presence of a laser. Okay, so ammonia, you know that ammonia is pyramidal with its lone pair being on top of the nitrogen. The lone pairs are directionally oriented on top of the nitrogen. Now, let us say that I have a laser which is oriented. Basically, I have a laser polarization which is oriented along the C3 axis of ammonia. So what did we tell you till now? In an oscillating frame of reference, an atom looks like a diatomic molecule. This is what we told you, right? So if you were to think of a laser polarization in which ammonia, the C3 axis of ammonia is oriented along the laser polarization direction. Along that direction, the nitrogen will start looking like a diatomic molecule. Okay, so you will have one well on top of nitrogen and one well inside the umbrella. So nitrogen as such is a single-centered well. When the laser polarization is oriented along the C3 axis, you know that the nitrogen, which is a monoatomic system, is going to behave like a diatomic system, right? This is what we told you. An atom looks like a diatomic molecule in the presence of a laser. So you will have one well on top of nitrogen, and you will have one well inside the umbrella. If you have one well on top of nitrogen and one well inside the umbrella, then the lone pair is going to get smeared out on both sides. You will have an equal probability of finding the lone pair on both sides of the umbrella. Okay, so this is what is given in the schematic sketch in the next one. So you have some kind of a laser-induced hybridization, which would smear out the lone pair in such a fashion that you have a larger probability of finding the lone pair inside the umbrella. If you have a larger probability of finding the lone pair inside and outside the umbrella, so if the probabilities are similar on in both the regions, then obviously you know this, that the structure which minimizes lone pair bond pair repulsion is going to be a planar transition state. Okay, so so this is what we wanted to check. So in the presence of the laser, there can be a laser-induced hybridization, which would smear the electrons on either side of ammonia. So the laser would take it to inside the umbrella, it will also take it to outside the umbrella, and the probabilities would remain the same. So you have spins, so you have the electrons, the lone pair actually distributed evenly in the system. In fact, they are a set of paired spins. It's not an unpaired state which becomes diamagnetic, so on and so forth. Paramagnetic, it's not an unpaired spin system in which it becomes paramagnetic. It's just a schematic picture. In fact, it should be both, the probability of finding both the electrons should be equal in both the places. So if you have such a kind of case, what is going to happen is the geometry which is favorable is going to be planar geometry, which is a transition state. Okay, so this is what we wanted to check. And how does the story go? The story goes like this. A single atom looks like a diatomic molecule in the presence of a laser. Fine. Now let us take ammonia molecules, which are aligned with the laser polarization axis along the dipole moment of ammonia or along the C3 axis. If you do something like that, now we said that the potential which ammonia molecule is going to see, so alpha 0 equal to 0 in figure 1a, is the case when is the potential of nitrogen without the laser. Now, as you keep increasing the laser strength, as alpha 0 increases, the system starts looking like a diatomic molecule. So this is actually something which has been plotted for the potential for nitrogen atom. And the part B of this figure here, shows you the charge density of ammonia molecule. So when the laser is not there, most of the charge density resides on the nitrogen atom. When the laser is slowly switched on, you see that ellipsoidal shape taking up. And then finally, you see at alpha 0 equal to 1.0, you actually see that there is an equal the density is such that the nitrogen is a double well state. So both the electrons, maximum probability of finding the electrons happens inside the ammonia umbrella and outside of it as well. What is plotted here is again the potential. Then you have charge density pictures. You have difference density pictures. All of these show that in the presence of the laser, in the case of pyramidal ammonia, the lone pair gets localized on either side of ammonia. One inside the umbrella and outside the umbrella. So, given this picture for pyramidal ammonia, we looked at the potential energy surface of ammonia molecule in the presence of the laser. So, the orange colored figure here, is the usual double well potential for ammonia. So, A is an inversion angle in the case of ammonia. R NH is the NH stretch. So, you have a two-dimensional potential energy surface. And this is the double well of ammonia which is being shown. Now, in the presence of the laser, for alpha 0 equal to 0.1 itself, the probability of finding electrons becomes inside and outside the umbrella becomes larger. So therefore, the double well potential energy surface gets converted into a single well minimum. Okay, so this is the case for the dynamics of electrons. This is the zeroth order Hamiltonian in the case of the dynamics for electrons. Then we also looked at Walsh diagrams in the presence of a laser. So these are the usual kind of Walsh diagrams which you have learned in chemistry. But the parameter here is not a nuclear parameter. The parameter here that we are looking at is a laser parameter. So we see this. There is another explanation for ammonia being pyramidal. Ammonia being pyramidal is usually explained in terms of a pseudo-Jahn-Teller distortion. Okay, it's explained in terms of a pseudo-Jahn-Teller distortion, and which you actually see here in terms of an avoided crossing. So there are some sort of degeneracies which are uplifted by the laser, or degeneracies which are induced by the laser, causing an equal probability of finding the lone pair on both sides. Then we actually did a time-dependent calculation. So the time-dependent calculation for the electronic dynamics that we had done, the red curve shows you what happens to the electronic energies of ammonia molecule when it is in its pyramidal form. The blue curve here shows you the electronic energies for ammonia molecule when it is in its planar form. So in its planar form, in the presence of the laser pulse, there is not much happening to the in the presence of the off resonant laser. But for pyramidal ammonia, obviously the energy keeps on increasing very, very large. Now, this itself is an explanation of why planar ammonia is stabilized in the presence of the laser. Again, the physical model that you can take recourse to is the first movie which you had seen. So when the laser is switched on, you have an oscillating potential. The oscillating force induces planar ammonia to be more stable. And on the right-hand side, you have the survival probabilities which are given. So initially, you actually see that the planar geometry is much more stable, or the ionization probability is also minimum in the case of the planar geometry. So this is what we see. So the norm is conserved. And when we do nuclear dynamics calculations, or when we do nuclear wave packet calculations on the potential energy surface, so now solving the Schrodinger equation for the nuclei in the presence of time-dependent potentials. So we have used some kind of an approximation within Born-Oppenheimer approximation. And when we did the nuclear wave packet dynamics, so initially the green portion here depicts the double well potential energy surface. As you keep coming towards the middle, the nuclear wave packet is going to populate the region where ammonia is going to remain as a transition state. Now, this is not going to happen for, this is not a 100% phenomenon. 75% of the probability density or the wave packet gets localized near the transition state region. So in principle, by using a laser of a particular orientation or polarization, one could actually populate the transition state region. So this is the this is the end of the message. And here I have here in this I have given you a set of movies. So the movie on the right-hand corner of my slide actually relates to a one-dimensional calculation in which the state gets stabilized on top of the barrier. It has progressed quite a bit. So initially, the double-lobed thing is an equal probability in both of the wells. In the presence of the laser, what is happening is both of these actually get merged together, and you see that it gets stabilized near zero. So you're able to trap the wave packet near the transition state region or the barrier. So this is probably a different methodology for transition state spectroscopy. And on the left-hand corner, the movie which plays on the left-hand corner, this movie which keeps on looping, this movie which plays on the left-hand corner is a two-dimensional wave packet calculation on which you have the inversion angle on one coordinate, which is the R3 coordinate, and rho, which is the other coordinate, which refers to the nth stretch. So as that keeps happening, you see that both the wave packets, which were initially in each of the individual wells, get trapped on top of the barrier. So this is the picture which we started with, and from laser-induced nuclear wave packet calculations, we get some sort of an approximate picture that the transition state region can be isolated or trapped using a laser. So one way of doing transition state spectroscopy. So then we have looked at various other molecules. We have, in fact, looked at benzene in a circularly polarized laser. So what we told you is the following. And a single atom in a linearly polarized laser looks like a diatomic molecule. Now, suppose I have a circularly polarized laser, a single atom is actually going to look like a donut. So in the figure given here, on the left-hand side, I have hydrogen atom. The spherical potential is the free field potential. There is no laser. If I have a circularly polarized laser, the hydrogen atom itself is going to look like a donut. Okay? It's going to look like a donut. So suppose if you consider something like benzene, I have 6 carbon atoms, which are you know what is the bond distance between those carbon atoms. Each of those carbon atoms are going to look like donuts. Okay, they're not going to look like single points. So the figure B here are single wells positioned at each of the carbon atoms. But in the presence of the circularly polarized laser, what is going to happen is each of the atom is going to start looking like a donut. So that is what you see in figure C. The laser is switched on, alpha 0 equal to 0.7. Now you keep increasing the strength of the laser, the radius of that circle or that donut is going to keep increasing. So at D, alpha 0 equal to 1.3, you see that they start joining together. So the black lines are the regions in which the electrons would get concentrated. At alpha 0 equal to 1.5, the circles start intersecting at 2 points. So the tori start intersecting at 2 points. The donuts start intersecting at 2 points. And for alpha 0 equal to 2.7, you see that all 6 donuts merge right in the center in creating a deep potential well in the middle, which means that you can actually populate 8 electron densities is in the middle of the ring. Okay. Usually in free field benzene, in the usual benzene, what you have is you have a pi cloud on top, you have a pi cloud below, and then you have the sigma framework in the middle. But here you see that if I take a circularly polarized light, the circularly polarized light in which is oriented along the plane of the benzene, in that case, you for a given laser intensity, you could have this particular effect in which all the 6 circles overlap in the middle, a deep potential forms in the middle, and you could have electrons in the middle of the ring. And this is what we checked by doing time-independent calculations. So this is how the computational chemistry comes in. These are densities, so potentials and densities. The red ones are the potentials of nuclear potentials of benzene. And you see, finally, in figure E, you have the small red star where the deepest potential is in the middle of the ring. Now, if you look at the charge densities, which are given here in blue, these are the charge densities of benzene in the presence of the circularly polarized laser. And what comes out very, very nicely is that you have a charge density actually concentrating in the middle of the ring. So where the Z has been marked here as an arrow, you see a bulge in the density there. So that's where the maximum density is. And then we have also done a full-blown orbital analysis of the laser-induced charged, laser-induced of benzene in the presence of a circularly polarized light. The first ones are actually the sigma, the core orbitals. And you see that the pi orbitals are unchanged. Obviously, the pi orbitals are unaffected because the pi orbitals have a density which is 0 in the middle of the plane. Okay, in the plane of the ring where the laser polarization is oriented, and the pi density is 0. Therefore, the pi orbitals are least affected by the laser. But the sigma framework actually gets distorted into something in which the electrons could actually get concentrated in the middle of the ring. You have to understand that this is not an equilibrium situation. Once the laser is switched off, everything will simply blow up into pieces, and the laser intensity is very, very high. But it is very interesting to understand that you could actually create non-equilibrium structures using a high-intensity laser. Now you can analyze this particular nodal structure of benzene by taking a direct product with particle on a ring. So we have done a comprehensive orbital analysis. So the nodal structure can be explained by taking a product of the orbitals of benzene together with a simple model such as the particle on a ring. We have looked at electrostatic potentials, electron localization function, and we've even looked at proton tunneling. So obviously, in the presence of a laser, if the electrons populate the middle of the ring, then if you want to look at something like H plus tunneling through benzene, going through the benzene ring. So here the interaction energy is given. The green one is the interaction energy without the laser, and the blue one is the interaction energy in the presence of the laser. So the probability of proton tunneling through the middle of the ring or the proton getting trapped in the middle of the ring actually keeps increasing when you have benzene in a circularly polarized light. It's simply because the electrons populate more in the middle of the ring. So one could think of it in terms of chemistry as if you want to think about the Wieland intermediate in the case of substitution electrophilic reactions, the possibility of formation of such kind of states is more induced if you have a circularly polarized laser and for particular laser parameters. We have looked at also the experimental measurement of these states, and this comes out through harmonic generation spectra. And we see that there are characteristic harmonic generation spectra for the cases in which the electron resides in the middle, so on and so forth. And then finally, I will actually come to the topic which I wanted to present, but I did not present. I had changed the topic, and I thought I would show you more pictures and movies than equations. So since we did all these calculations, we wanted to really do computational chemistry in terms of visualizing how the orbitals would change in the presence of a laser pulse. And the first example which we had taken was that of ethylene. And this is a program that is not really freely available on the net because we are still developing it. It is a completely in-house developed package. It works with the usual basis sets, 631G star, the full set, STO3G, what 321G, 6311 plus G, 2D, 2P, so on and so forth. So this is time-dependent Hartree Fock. It's not the usual Hartree Fock which you run using games or any other software. It's a time-dependent Hartree Fock which we are looking at. And in this case, we have actually looked at a resonant laser. And the orbitals which I'm showing here, so I have the HOMO of ethylene with the red and the blue things. And then you have LUMO plus 4. So LUMO plus 4 is the one to which you have a non-vanishing transition dipole. The rest of the orbitals in between, the dipole moment. So this is the largest non-vanishing transition dipole, which would give you your lambda max if you look at absorption experiments. So now in the presence of the laser, we wanted to see how these orbitals evolve. So it's a resonant laser. It couples both of these two energy levels. So I'll try to explain this movie in the following. So initially I have the laser intensity is less. So the HOMO looks like the usual HOMO. And then you will see something very interesting happening when the resonance comes up. So the resonance is going to mix up both of these orbitals. You will see that the HOMO starts looking like the LUMO which was plotted, and the LUMO will start looking like the HOMO. Okay, so the HOMO starts looking like the LUMO which was plotted, and the LUMO starts looking like the HOMO. And this is exactly a resonance condition in which the orbitals mix up. And this is a visualization of the resonance in high intensity spectroscopy. So this is time-dependent Hartree-Fock. So we don't solve the usual Hartree-Fock equations here. We don't do a diagonalization. We simply set up the Fock matrix. We simply set up the Fock matrix in the given basis, and we actually try to make a physical picture of what happens to the orbitals in the presence of a laser. So this is where we stand currently. So one of the examples is this. What I wanted to actually do was to discuss the time-dependent Hartree-Fock algorithm. This is also true for time-dependent density functional theory. Our algorithm also works for real-time TD-DFT. Not linear response real-time TD-DFT, but real-time TD-DFT. And there is an in-house package. Even the integrals are calculated from the scratch. We have not yet given a name to the package, but it's going to be made available. It will be made available in probably the next year, and the name is going to be Abeldyne, Ab initio electronic dynamics. Abeldyne will be, that's what it will be called. And the first version is going to come out soon. So here I have also given you a movie of how the density of ethylene evolves in time. So the linear polarization is taken along the CC bond. The linear polarization of the laser is taken along the CC bond. So at every time instant, you see that the charge density moves from the carbon on the right to the carbon on the left following the laser pulse. Okay, so you see that there is a bulge appearing in time on the right, and then there is a bulge appearing on time in the left. So this is basically how the density looks like. You don't see much of a variation here, but to make things more effective, if you simply look at the difference density, so the difference density here is defined as rho free field minus rho laser. So this, you really see the charge. The blue one is a charge buildup. The white one is a charge getting the charge depletion. So you have a picture of how the induced dipole moment actually goes in ethylene to and fro when you take a resonant laser condition. So the charge density keeps skipping from atom on the right, carbon atom on the right to carbon atom on the left, carbon atom on the right to carbon atom on the left. So you see the charge density keeps on oscillating like this. And the final movie which I have is, again, for you to show you a real picture. This is the electron localization function of ethylene in the presence of a strong off-resonant laser. This is an off-resonant laser. So the electron localization, again, now it's on the right carbon atom. It goes to the left carbon atom. There are some non-adiabatic effects which come into play. So these are not just time-dependent coefficients of the orbitals. These are actually a time-dependent orbitals. So it is a time-dependent Hamiltonian that you're solving. You're looking at time-dependent orbitals. So all non-adiabatic effects are incorporated within the Hartree-Fock. And there's something very special in the Hartree-Fock that we are doing. Our Hartree-Fock has got memory effects. And so to tell you what are those, I would have to look at. But this is the picture that you get when you look at the electron localization function of ethylene in the presence of an off-resonant laser. So I'll speed up this movie because I'm running out of time. Yeah, and so basically this is our group. This is a slightly older picture. Now we have new BSMS students in. And I would like to thank Arunan and Manoj for giving me this chance to present our small things in computational chemistry. Thank you very much.